Hello runners, welcome to the Keeping Runners on the Road series. So glad that you could join us today. Today we want to answer the question of, is there anything that I can do to prevent running injuries? So it's a big question. A lot of people have that question of, well, what can I do? How do I stop running injuries from happening in the first place? And is there anything I can really do to make that happen? So before we get into that, I want to just say, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop those down in the comments below. And if you'd like to get access to the rest of our Keeping Runners on the Road series, let me know. Just say I'm in or I want that in the comments down below, and we'll make sure to get you tagged in some of those other posts so that you can see this whole series as well. So let's take a deeper dive into what I can do and how I can prevent running injuries from happening in the first place, or even if that's possible. So granted, there are some injuries, some things that happen which aren't very preventable. For example, I've been kind of nursing my foot along. I injured it while running in New Orleans. I hit a cobblestone that just overstretched my plantar fascia a little bit and kind of injured it. Now, theoretically, I could have maybe decreased my impact force or some other things like that, so that force that I'm hitting the ground with, by taking shorter strides or some other things, maybe that would have made the force less. But honestly, I think it was just kind of a freak accident type of a thing where I just hit that cobblestone just wrong and it overstretched that plantar fascia. So sometimes we can't do much to prevent those running injuries, potholes or other things like that on the road. Sometimes just poop happens, right? But a lot of the time there are things that we can do to help prevent or at least minimize the risk of running injuries. So the biggest thing is kind of what I mentioned first, is decreasing our force with the ground. So we impact the ground with every single step, and we want to learn through improving our running form and strengthening the areas that need to be strengthened, so that our impact with the ground is minimized as much as possible, so that with every step we're putting less load or less wear and tear through all of the joints that kind of shock absorb for us as we run. And so we've got the knee, the ankle, the hips, even the spine, and the feet are all working to shock absorb with every step that we take. And so there are certain things that we can do to minimize those impact forces or those loading forces as we take each single step in running. And so by minimizing those, cutting those down to as smooth a run as possible with as less jarring impact as we can, that's going to really help. And now a lot of people do that through shoes or other things. I'm not a big believer in that. In fact, most studies have shown that the thicker the sole of the shoe, the more we actually stomp the ground and impact the ground harder. And so that foam is absorbing a ton of that, but it teaches poor mechanics, and we tend to stomp the ground harder in other shoes as well, or just learn bad mechanics. It also does tend to just pass the buck up chain when we're smashing our feet down in the ground. Trying to feel the ground is really why we do that. So we tend to have a heavier step with the thicker sole shoes. And so really the way we want to minimize impact forces or the force in contact with the ground with every step is simply by retraining our gait pattern to be as quiet and as soft and as smooth as possible and as efficient as possible. And as we do that, we're going to really decrease those forces. The other thing that we can do is really take a look at strength and mobility type problems. Are we moving with funny movement patterns that cause us to really strike the ground hard, or that cause us to do certain motions like swinging the hip around or landing on a straighter knee, or other things that are going to increase our risk for wear and tear type problems? And then weaknesses. If we have weaknesses, especially through our hips or through our calf muscles, through all the muscles of the lower leg, what we can do is put too much stress on something else. If those muscles aren't strong and keeping things balanced, if we're letting our hips have too much movement, side to side, or too much rotational movement, or too much movement in the foot where our arch is collapsing too much, a lot of different ways that weakness throughout the hips and lower leg can cause a lot of problems that wind up bearing forth in these kind of overuse injuries. And so the biggest thing that we can do to avoid injuries, to stop injuries or prevent them in the first place, is really to decrease impact and to strengthen and make sure we have good mobility in all of our joints so that things are moving properly and with good strength, so that we're not getting these funny movement patterns. So if we can do that through retraining our gait if needed, or retraining our running pattern, as well as strengthening those things that need to be strengthened and making sure we have good motion, we're going to be a lot safer and avoid as many of those running injuries as we possibly can. So those are the two take-homes for that, of how to prevent running injuries. We're going to talk a bit more about that in the next videos, where we're going to talk about more specific strategies of what you can do to strengthen, as well as how we can decrease those impact forces through our form. So we'll talk a little bit more about those things coming up.